3 years ago, my life took a harsh turn when my marriage ended in divorce. I, a 46-year-old man, and my then wife, who was 41, went our separate ways. This event deeply affected my relationship with my 26-year-old daughter, who chose to cut off all contact with me and align with her mother, never taking the time to hear my side of the story. Navigating life after the divorce was challenging. It required me to come to terms with the new reality of our broken family. The pain was compounded by my ex-wife's efforts to tarnish my reputation. But the most significant blow came from losing contact with my daughter. Since she was already an adult, I had no way to influence her decisions. It felt like a vital part of my life was abruptly ripped away, leaving me to face the world without the support of my own family except for my mother, who suffered from Alzheimer's. Over the years, I made several attempts to reach out to my daughter, hoping to bridge the gap and share my perspective. However, she firmly sided with her mother and remained indifferent to my attempts. Eventually, my ex-wife threatened legal action, accusing me of harassment, which made it clear that I needed to stop trying to contact my daughter. It was a painful realization, but I respected their boundaries and focused on taking care of my mother and my career instead. I've lived a relatively solitary life since then, punctuated by a few casual relationships, but the fear of being hurt again kept me from getting too close to anyone. The recent loss of my mother was another heavy blow, leaving me to grieve in isolation, without the comfort of family. The reason I'm sharing this now is that after all these years, my daughter reached out to me. It was unexpected, and at first, I was thrilled, thinking perhaps she was ready to mend our relationship. A few months after my mother's passing, I received a call from an unknown number. It was my daughter on the line, though I hardly recognized her voice. Despite my initial excitement, I soon realized her contact might be motivated by the inheritance left after my mother's death, rather than a genuine desire to reconnect. This suspicion has been hard to digest, as I had hoped her intentions were rooted in empathy and a wish to rebuild our familial bond. It had been so long since we last spoke that when my daughter called to reintroduce herself, I was genuinely surprised. She mentioned seeing on Facebook that her grandmother had passed away and wanted to check up on me. I was touched that she had been keeping an eye on me through social media, which I hadn't realized. Gratefully, I thanked her for her call. I was managing okay, and confessed how much I missed her. During our conversation, she suggested meeting in person to truly catch up beyond just phone calls. I was overjoyed, and we quickly made plans for her to come over to my house that weekend. The anticipation of reuniting with her filled me with excitement, prompting me to share my feelings in this post. My hope was that we could begin to mend our strained relationship or, at the very least, start getting to know each other again. When the day arrived, I decided to cook dinner for her. The moment I opened the door to greet her, I was struck by how much she had changed. Nearly a decade had passed since I last saw her as a young girl. Initially, our conversation was somewhat awkward, but as the evening progressed, we gradually opened up. She shared details about her life and career, while I filled her in on the years we had missed. As dinner wound down, we addressed the lingering tension that had distanced us for so many years. I brought up the past, asking why she had never sought my perspective during the divorce, choosing instead to side with her mother by default. I acknowledged that her mother, having been a stay-at-home parent, was more present during her upbringing while I had been consumed by long hours in construction. Nevertheless, I always strived to make as much time for her as I could. My daughter expressed regret over how things had unfolded. She admitted that she was too young to fully understand the situation back then and had been swayed by her mother's portrayal of events. Apparently, her mother had painted a picture of me as the villain, someone who cared only for himself, which led her to never seek out my side of the story. This conversation opened a door for us to explore a more honest relationship moving forward, acknowledging past mistakes and miscommunications. It was a poignant reminder of the complexities of family dynamics and the power of reconciliation. As we continued talking, things were progressing smoothly until the topic shifted to why she had reached out after so many years. When I asked her, she initially seemed uneasy, but I encouraged her to be open with me. She confessed that she had been keeping tabs on me through Facebook. Learning of her grandmother's passing made her assume she would be contacted about an inheritance. But when that didn't happen, she decided to approach me directly. She admitted that while she wanted to give me time to grieve, she was also facing financial pressures. Recently engaged, she found herself needing funds to cover wedding expenses. Hearing this felt like a blow. I had thought that her reaching out was a sign that she wanted to reconnect and rebuild our family ties. But it appeared her motivations were primarily financial. This revelation was disappointing. The inheritance, as it turned out, was legally mine, and had our relationship been better, I might have willingly shared it with her. Despite not being driven by material wealth, I lived simply, buying clothes from Target and avoiding extravagant spending. I would have helped her with her wedding if she had approached me sincerely and not out of necessity. I tried to stay composed, even as I felt a mix of emotions. When I asked if money was all she was after, she became defensive. She insisted that reconnecting with me was her true intention and that she regretted not reaching out sooner, especially while her grandmother was still alive. She expressed remorse for the years lost and blamed her lack of courage to reach out on the fear that I would reject her, influenced by her mother's negative portrayal of me during and after the divorce. Her response was fraught with tension and regret. She seemed to be struggling with her actions, torn between her financial needs and the genuine desire to mend our relationship. The panic in her eyes suggested she was trying to navigate her conflicting motivations, aiming to smooth over the awkwardness of her financial request with a deeper wish to reconnect. This complex mix of emotions and intentions left me to ponder the delicate balance of forgiveness and skepticism as we attempted to bridge the gap between us after years of separation. In the midst of our long overdue conversation, the subject of inheritance came up, and I found myself wondering about my daughter's true intentions. When I questioned how she knew there might be an inheritance waiting, she recounted a visit with my late mother years ago before the divorce, when my mother had expressed a desire for her, the sole grandchild, to inherit everything left by my father who had passed, away long before. At the time, my marriage was stable, and it seemed natural for my mother to promise this to my daughter. I could understand why she might have mentioned it, especially under the assumption that our family dynamics would remain unchanged. If none of the disruptions had occurred my divorce, my daughter cutting off contact the inheritance would have logically been hers. Yet, the gnawing thought that she might be reconnecting solely for financial reasons left me heartbroken. Determined to test her sincerity, I crafted a scenario to see her reaction. I inquired casually about how much she expected from the inheritance, and her answer seemed well considered, hinting at some prior calculation. I then informed her, apologetically, that everything had been left to me and that I planned to use these funds to start a business, which meant I could not assist her financially as she hoped. However, I offered a few $1,000s from my own resources to help with her wedding expenses. The visible disappointment on her face when she heard there was no large inheritance forthcoming seemed to confirm my worst fears. She argued that, as the only grandchild, she deserved some portion of what she believed was rightfully hers. I stood firm, explaining that my plans were already set, and there was little more I could do if she was unhappy with what I was willing to offer. Her reaction escalated quickly, her frustration turning to anger as she accused me of being the selfish person her mother had always claimed I was. Her words were painful, and in that moment, the stark reality of our strained relationship was laid bare. She even insinuated that I deserved to be alone, a blow that cut deep. Her response led me to reflect on our entire relationship and the influence of her mother's perspective over the years. I couldn't help but remark bitterly that she was indeed her mother's daughter, reaching out only when in need. Her attempt to leverage my recent bereavement as a means to secure a financial advantage was appalling. She began to say more, but I cut her off, laughing out of disbelief and frustration. I reminded her that if she hadn't blocked me all those years, she would have received my messages during her grandmother's illness texts, where I had expressed a desire for them to reconnect before Alzheimer's stole her memories completely. This revelation seemed to take her aback. Prompted by her confusion, I asked her to unblock my old number so I could resend all those unread messages. She complied, and I forwarded each text, revealing my efforts to keep her informed about her grandmother's condition and my repeated invitations to meet. This disclosure seemed to alter her understanding of the past, showing her a side of the story she had never considered, filtered through the narrative constructed by her mother. It pained me deeply to not fulfill my mother's wish for my daughter to be part of our family story. Now, this very child, whom I felt had turned her back on me, brazenly asked about her inheritance. After reading the messages I had sent her over the years, my daughter seemed genuinely remorseful. She apologized, but then argued that her grandmother would have wanted her to receive a share of the inheritance. She believed it was unfair for me to withhold it based on her past actions, claiming her youth and lack of understanding at the time of the divorce excused her earlier decisions. She expressed a desire to mend our relationship, but also hinted that my decision on the inheritance might affect her willingness to do so. I was torn because I wanted to believe her intentions were genuine about rebuilding our connection, but the situation made me skeptical. When I made it clear that the inheritance was off the table, the look of sheer animosity she gave me before storming out was unforgettable. I didn't stop her. In the aftermath, I discussed the situation with friends. While most supported my stance, one close friend suggested that since I wasn't particularly attached to the money, perhaps letting my daughter have some of it might pave the way for family reconciliation. His words have lingered in my mind, making me question my decision. I've been reflecting on this a lot since posting here and receiving various opinions. To address the common inquiries about the background of my divorce, I had been married for 19 years when I discovered my wife's multiple affairs. This betrayal devastated me, leading to heavy drinking and reckless behavior. Our confrontations, fueled by my drinking, easily allowed her to sway our daughter to her side. Once I managed to stop drinking and attempted to rebuild my life, I reached out to apologize to my daughter, but she was unwilling to hear me out and maintained her distance. Now, considering all this, the question of the inheritance resurfaces. It's true, the money technically belonged to my father, and by extension was intended for the family. I find myself caught between holding on to what feels just and potentially using this inheritance as a bridge to reconnect with my daughter, despite the conditions it might entail. This dilemma continues to challenge me, especially as I weigh the value of potentially having my daughter back in my life against the backdrop of our strained past. Both of my parents were engineers and had acquired various properties throughout the city over the course of their careers. Most of these properties were rented out, generating significant income. When my father passed away at the time I was 13, he left everything to my mother. All of these assets remained in her name throughout my marriage and even after my divorce, as her health remained stable for a few years following. After her passing, I inherited everything as her sole heir. During the divorce, my wife received only alimony, which ceased when she remarried, because all property was in my mother's name at the time. Regarding my financial situation, I have never needed to rely on the rental income from the properties because the earnings from my shoe business were more than sufficient for a comfortable life. I hope this clears up any questions. My daughter has not reached out to me since the night we discussed the inheritance, and honestly, I don't anticipate that she will. Her actions made it painfully clear that her interest was primarily in the inheritance, and now that she understands it's not available to her, I doubt she will return. While this realization does sadden me, it has also taught me to temper my expectations of others, regardless of our relationships. Just as I thought I had settled on this new outlook, something unexpected happened. I had just returned from work one evening and was thinking about going out with some friends when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, there stood my ex-wife. She had changed her appearance significantly, new hairstyle, noticeable weight loss, which threw me off for a moment. It was startling to see her, to say the least. Hesitant, I invited her in, not wanting to leave her standing at the door. The atmosphere was awkward as we exchanged pleasantries. She eventually brought up the reason for her visit, explaining that our daughter had contacted her about the inheritance. I wasn't surprised, but seemed the only plausible reason for her to reach out after so much time. My ex-wife acknowledged that the divorce had been hard on me and admitted that she might have taken her actions too far. I couldn't help but scoff at her understatement, though she seemed to ignore my reaction. She then echoed a sentiment similar to our daughter's, arguing that I should not let the past conflict between us influence my decisions about our daughter's future. This conversation was unexpected, and while it reopened old wounds, it also presented a perspective that I hadn't fully considered. The visit left me with much to think about, concerning forgiveness, the past, and how to move forward. During a candid conversation with my ex-wife about our daughter, she tried to excuse her past decisions by reminding me of her young age during our divorce and suggesting I shouldn't hold any resentment for her siding with her mother. I stopped her there to clarify that I harbored no resentment toward anyone anymore. If there was any lingering disappointment, it wasn't directed at my daughter for the choices she made as a child, but rather at the recent realization that her reconnection seemed driven by financial incentives rather than genuine affection. I explained as much to my ex-wife, echoing what I had already told my daughter. Had she reached out sooner with genuine intentions, she might have naturally received the inheritance. My ex-wife attempted to defend their actions, but I firmly reiterated that my decision was final. If they were going to fixate on the inheritance, it was a fruitless cycle that wasted everyone's time. I concluded the conversation by stating I had other plans, and it was best if she left if there was nothing more to discuss. She acknowledged this, apologized for the intrusion, and left. After she departed, I sat alone, flooded by a mix of emotions and old memories I'd rather have left undisturbed. Later, I went out with friends in an attempt to shake off the unsettling feelings from our interaction. Since then, in a surprising turn of events, I received a call from my daughter. I was hesitant to answer, bracing myself for another inheritance-related conversation. However, she caught me off guard by expressing her desire to apologize. She acknowledged her past mistakes and expressed a wish to mend our relationship, even inviting me to her wedding. This left me profoundly conflicted. On one hand, I was thrilled at the prospect of being included in such a significant moment in her life. On the other, I couldn't help but wonder if this was another strategy to secure a future inheritance. Despite these doubts, I've decided to attend the wedding. Many of you advise that attending could do no harm, and I agree. It's a chance to potentially start anew without necessarily committing to anything further. I won't be in the wedding party, just attending as a guest seems like a reasonable step, considering our long estrangement.